Hi everyone, welcome back. Today I'm going to be discussing Assata, an autobiography which was penned by Assata Shakur herself. This book that I have is 274 pages long. If you want to listen to this book on Audible, it will be about 12 hours and 18 minutes. And the book was originally published in 1978. This is a book penned by Assata herself about her experiences growing up, but also the experience that catapulted her into, I would say, the public imagination in terms of what had happened, where she was considered FBI's most wanted, and all the things leading up to, all the incidents that led up to that. I'm going to read the blurb, which reads, on May 2nd, 1973, Black Panther Assata Shakur, aka Joanne Chesimard, lay in a hospital close to death, handcuffed to her bed while local, state, and federal police attempted to question her about the shootout on the New Jersey Turnpike that had claimed the life of a white state trooper. Long a target of J. Edgar Hoover's campaign to defame, infiltrate, and criminalize black nationalist organizations and their leaders, Shakur was incarcerated for 4 years prior to her conviction on flimsy evidence in 1977 as an accomplice to murder. This intensely personal and political autobiography belies the fearsome image of Joanne Chesimard, long projected by the media and the state. With wit and candor, Assata Shakur recounts the experiences that led her to a life of activism and portrays the strengths, weaknesses, and eventual demise of black and white revolutionary groups at the hands of government officials. The result is a signal contribution to the literature about growing up in Black America that has already taken its place alongside the autobiography of Malcolm X and the works of Maya Angelou. 2 years after her conviction, Assata Shakur escaped from prison. She was given political asylum by Cuba, where she now resides. Okay, so I originally first heard about this book in 2018. I had heard about Assata Shakur way before that, obviously, but this actual book I heard about from a friend of mine who was visiting Manhattan at the time, in the winter of 2018. And at the time, I was in my first semester. Oh my gosh, my first semester in college, and it was a tough time, but seeing her was like a bright, warm light in winter, in the cold. And she was telling me the story about this book, and the way we started talking about books was that we were at Union Square, and I don't know if I mentioned my friend's name already, Manyata. She's a photographer, dope as photographer, by the way. She was visiting. We went to Union Square, and then we decided to go and walk inside Barnes and Nobles that is in the square. And we were just looking at all kinds of books, and we were just talking, catching up, etc. And one of the things that she mentioned was that, you know, when she was younger, somebody gave her this book, and then when her and that person broke up, the person was like, give me my book back. And she was actually quite crushed about giving the book back because it was such an important read. She cried. It was like a tough read, you know, but it was one of those books that shaped her. And I don't know, for me, it's like when I hear something that impactful, a story that impactful of how a book changed someone's life, it's hard for me to forget that book. And there's a few books like that I have in my library now. So in any case, at the time, I was not in a position to be buying anything besides a Metro card, food, and borrowing books from the library. So I kept it in the back of my mind. And then eventually in 2020, July, so last year, 2020, I finally bought my own copy. And I remember at the time, it was still during the beginning of the pandemic, I would say, or maybe not so much the beginning, but like we were still in deep pandemic mode. I mean, what's the beginning at this point? Because it's 2021 and we're still in it. So maybe it will be considered, you know, historically, when we look back at it, it'll be the beginning. But it was still in the middle of the pandemic. In New York City, George Floyd had just been murdered a couple of weeks before that, and people were still, you know, ignited by what had happened, and people were taking to the streets, and all kinds of social media was talking about the murder. And to be honest, for me, it was very hard to, and I'm sure for most people, it was very hard to be on social media and to watch the news or anything like that, because it was like you kept seeing this person getting murdered over and over and over and over and over again, as if once was not enough. And so I had to like actively stay away from social media, actively stay away from Twitter especially, actively stay away from news, you know, political news, because it was just like really damaging mentally and emotionally to my well-being. And so when I bought this book, I knew that I was going to eventually read it at some point, but I didn't know when that time would come. And I can say that something that I personally am constantly battling is moving between, you know, responding to the harshness of life and reminding myself of the softness that I can hold and that I have within me and that I can expand and share with others. And it's almost like living between the space of like extreme anger and then extreme like soft. And obviously I'm a human being, so I have a spectrum of emotions. It's not just those two, but this is something that I'm constantly being aware of. I'm constantly like gauging within myself, like how far towards the harsh and angry am I moving, and how far towards the soft and like I don't know, humane, personable am I leaning. Because obviously as a black woman, there's a lot of things that I encounter in life that kind of push me towards the harshness side of life. And so I do the same with reading books. I try and really be careful about what I consume and knowing how it's going to affect me. And so when I eventually opened this book, I had to be very ready. And so I did a lot of stuff to prepare myself for diving into this book. I did a lot of preparation in terms of like thinking about why it was important for me to know these stories, acknowledging that this was a story that a black woman wrote about her own life, and that in itself was like a powerful act of, you know, solidarity. And so I went into it after a lot of preparation, and I can tell you that I do not regret reading this book. This is one of the most powerful books I've ever read. One of the things that I would say stands out about the experience of reading it and the way the book is laid out is that we're constantly moving again in between the same things that I'm constantly aware of moving between, which is harshness and softness, anger and, you know, humanity. Or not that humanity, not that you're not, wow, not that if you're angry you don't have any humanity, but it's more like seeing the positive sides of humanity and seeing the negative sides of humanity, more like. And wow, she did an excellent job of telling the story in a way where we were not always living in one space. We were not always just living in the harsh, and we were not always just living in the soft. We're constantly going back and forth. And I think that's what made the book readable for me, and it made it possible for me to finish the book without feeling like, oh, this is too much. And so that's kind of, I would say, the format of the book. The book also, like, there's a lot of times where she talks about places actually in New York and obviously in the States, because that's where it takes place. But one of the things that I really, really appreciate is that this book has further brought me into appreciation for all of the hard work, pain, difficulty, challenges, atrocities, tragedies that Black Americans have had to go through so that all of us can enjoy the country as it is and continue to build, you know, America in a way that it can accept more and more people. And I don't know that we talk enough about how myself as an African or someone who's from the Caribbean can come here and have the kind of existence that we are afforded here because Black Americans did the work that they did. In the same way that I would say other Black people from other countries can come to South Africa and have an experience that they have because of the work that Black South Africans have done leading up to that. And so these are the things that were awoken in me as I was reading this book, and just the level of appreciation for like the amount of sacrifice that people who came before me, even if they're not from my own lineage, what they've had to sacrifice for me to be able to live in New York, to build a life in New York in 2021 whenever I came here. So yeah, it just brought me into a deep awareness and a gratitude for that. The other big thing about the book is that the parts where she talks about her childhood are just so relatable and so normal that it creates this strange relationship in my mind of like, how does someone who grew up that way become seen as someone who's like FBI's most wanted murderer type of thing? And I think she was able to brilliantly create that thing of like, this is how the narrative changes because we don't have an opportunity to tell our own stories. And I think her writing this book was a way of reclaiming that story, reclaiming her narrative, and presenting herself to us the way that she wants to do so. And so this is a very, very powerful book. I mean, I think that the story of Assata is something that is widely known, and I think even with that, it's still a worthwhile read because you just get to have this inside look that you just would not get from her own lips, you know. There's a lot of documentaries that are out there where she's interviewed while she's in Havana or different parts of Cuba, and I definitely recommend watching that if you can't get your hands on the book. But if you can eventually get your hands on the book, I still recommend doing it. There was something else I wanted to talk about that I wanted to say. I think I actually wrote it down, and it had to do with resilience. Yeah, the I would say the biggest nugget that I took out of this book is that the human spirit is something phenomenal, and we can survive the unsurvivable. We can overcome the impossible. We can live through the unlivable. You know, we can really push through just with that one thing called the human spirit. And I mean, some of the things that she went through is I can't believe that she didn't die, to be quite frank. And so the human spirit is just one amazing thing. Another thing is obviously the importance of telling our own stories. You know, it's priceless, the ability to come in front of a people and say, this is who I am, and present yourself how you want to be presented, and to tell your story the way that you want it to be told. And so I highly recommend this book. It's a book that I think is in the public imagination. It's been spoken about. She's somebody who's been spoken about a lot. And I just think that this book gives you an unprecedented look into her psyche, her the way that she views the world, and her personal experiences. And then of course, it's like, I'm somebody who's very interested in how people create movements, how activist groups, the rise and fall. I'm always interested in looking at that and all the elements that go into that. And something that was fascinating to me as someone who has organized in different parts of the world and who's been an activist for a long time, it's fascinating to see like the kinks and the cracks that existed within the Black Panther movement. Even though we talk about it with so much, you know, revelation and like wowness, today it was still a flawed organization because it was run by people. And yeah, it's just interesting to see. I actually recognized a lot of the things that went wrong, I would say, internally with the organizing team that I've seen in other spaces that I've been a part of or that I've observed. And so that's another fascinating thing, but definitely a worthwhile read. And if you have read it, please let me know what your experience was or what stood out to you the most, because there's a lot that stands out in this book and the story. But if you have read the book already, please let me know what your experience was and what stood out for you the most. All right, so the book community spotlight for today is somebody who I have known for quite some time that I met in Cape Town, Smangele Mathebula, who's also known as Madibookeng. I love that name and that Instagram name, Madibookeng. Such an amazing, smart, witty Instagram name and nickname. She is somebody who, when I initially met her, I was just like amazed at her aura. It felt soft, it felt warm, it felt welcoming, and I just felt like non-judgment just radiating from her. And I think there's very few people that I encounter that my initial feeling with them is that. And I think I would say my biggest regret is that I didn't get to spend more time with Smangele. But thank goodness to online spaces that I can actually spend time with her without being in a physical space with her. And the project that I'd like to highlight that she has been working on for a while now is a podcast called I Love Books with Madibookeng, and you can get it on Spotify, SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Anchor, all kinds of places. But apart from the podcast, which focuses specifically on asking one simple question around books, it's like a bite-sized conversation. I can actually read to you how she describes it herself. The podcast is a series of bite-sized conversations with book lovers on why they love books. Madibookeng, Smangele Mathebula chats to an array of special guests to explore their relationship with books and reading and how they came to it. I would say that she eats, breathes, lives books, and I would highly recommend checking out all of her Instagram pages. She has one called Deep Holding. She has another one called Madibookeng, which is her own personal one. And then she also has one called I Love Books with Madibookeng. And all of the Instagram pages are just so beautifully curated. You can see there's a lot of thoughtfulness that goes into it. And I just really appreciate the visuals, but also that those visuals are paired with someone who has dedicated a lot of time, a lot of her life towards books, but specifically African storytelling, and just the importance of the existence of African storytelling and books in the world. And I feel like you're in for a treat once you look into any and all of her Instagram pages. Let me know what you think, and I hope you feel invited to connect with her beyond just knowing that she exists and listening to her podcast. Yeah. So the mixtape of the week is a mixtape by Fly Hendrix that was actually originally featured on Mokada Digital Presents. Mokada stands for the Museum of Contemporary African Diasporan Arts, and it's located in Fort Greene in Brooklyn. I've actually been there a few times, and so this was actually episode 1, and it makes sense that this would be episode 1. Just to read you a little bit about what the show that it was featured on is about. Audiophiles is the name of the show. Is a mixed show with an informed experience surrounding music of the African diaspora. Whether it's house, blues, bounce, hip-hop, Afrobeat, or techno, Black music has birthed soundtracks for people from all walks of life around the globe, and Audiophiles highlights these contributions. So for this particular episode by Fly Hendrix, who's the person who actually curated it, there's a lot of music that was featured that was all about Black women who are part of the diaspora. And what I loved about it is that it felt like it was curated with the sensibilities of grounding, but also just like badassness. Like for me, it's like one of those playlists that I return to when I need anchoring, or a playlist that I return to when I need to remind myself of the amazingness of Black women in the world, and reminding myself that I'm not the only Black woman who's trying to create something in the world. And I also feel like there are different generations that are featured on it, and I really, really appreciate it. And I'll just read you a little bit about how they just Fly Hendrix's bio on the audiophile mix. So Fly Hendrix is a dedicated DJ producer with an eclectic soulful taste, co-founder of Cape Town's legendary brand Vinyl Digs, established in 2011. Well known for its ability to facilitate genuine connection, diversity, and beautiful energy in any city. And you know, this playlist, I would say that it's something that really, it's like a portal, but it's also like an anchoring space, and I recommend listening to it when you need a little boost, or if you're trying to get into a space of reading or come out of a space of reading. Like I feel like this is one of the playlists that I definitely listen to in preparation for reading Assata's book. I feel like it's also like a lovely book, that a lovely mixtape you can listen to with friends when you're hanging out on a Saturday somewhere. It's also like a perfect pajama party. I don't know, do people still have pajama parties now with this pandemic? But it's a it's a perfect sleepover mixtape. And yeah, Jess is an incredible person, and she's been dedicated to music for a very, very long time. So I definitely invite you to listen to the mixtape, and it'll be in the bio. Today is another one of those days where I felt like I was just stuttering and stammering through this thing. And again, I'm just going to let it be what it is, and just hope that as time progresses, I get better and better in this, just trusting my past selves and my future selves to be able to just get it right, to a place where I feel 100% confident doing this. But thank you again for joining me. And I wanted to give a shout out to Fifi. She really liked my candles, so this time I made like a proper dedicated area for candles. As I start to get our home space feeling more and more like a home space. Hopefully the setup will feel more homey as well and more welcoming and inviting. Anyway, thank you for joining me, and I hope you have a wonderful day further. Goodbye.